In my opinion, there's no better place to go to find stylish, affordable thrift finds than St. Vinny's. Why? I found rare vintage pieces there. I've decorated my house with their furniture and frames, and it's local. The proceeds help people in need through microloans, food pantries, and housing support. Plus, it's eco-friendly. Reduce, reuse, recycle, my friends. Go shop at your St. Vinny's today. Find your nearest store at shopstvinny's.com. That's shop, STVINNYS.com. Today on CityCast Madison. Fall primary elections are 2 weeks away. Election Day is on Tuesday, August 13th. And tomorrow is the first day you can vote in-person absentee. So we want to get you up to speed on who and what is on the ballot in Dane County. We sat down with Cap Times state government reporter Andrew Ball, who's been covering the primary races, to get the rundown on the candidates and referendum questions. It's Monday, July 29th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Andrew, hello.
Hello.
So, it's election season, and all eyes are on this historic presidential race this fall, let's be honest. Wisconsin is like right near the center of the universe for that race. And then there are primaries to elect state officials, and they don't tend to get the same energy. So why should people care about what's going on in the state government when we've got this whole presidential hurrah going on?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And kind of the sales pitch I always use to people is that, no doubt about it, federal government's important. Who's in the White House is important. But for a lot of people, you know, the services they use, the issues and policies they're passionate about, the biggest place where those are being debated and discussed and shaped is actually at the state level, in the state legislature and in state agencies. And, you know, there are big stakes for a lot of those issues this year. And kind of going off that, you'll see on the ballot maybe some different names that you've never heard of before, because we have all new maps for state Senate and state assembly, where some of those really big decisions are taking place. Mm-hmm. You know, that particularly in Dane County, the districts look very different. So
yes. And I want to ask you about it.
Yes. Well, yeah, this is definitely an election to do some research, because it is not all straightforward.
Okay, good. Well, that's why we have you here, and I'm already feeling better that we're talking with you. So I just, before we get into some of the things on the ballot, I just want to ask, like, just the basics. What are the roles of our state legislators? Like, what are the kinds of problems or issues people might bring to them?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, because we get those types of questions a lot from people. One of the big things that the state legislature does that is unique to them is they pass a budget. And we're going to get in a little bit to kind of the gory details of what that all means. But a big piece of that is, you know, your tax dollars go to Madison. Madison gets money from the federal government too. And the governor and the legislature, particularly a powerful committee that writes the budget, will all get together and figure out, how are we going to spend that money? You know, where should we be putting more money into for roads, for mental health services, for schools, for the University of Wisconsin? So that's a big one. And then also, you know, a lot of, you know, what you were talking about, things like abortion, these big issues get a lot of attention, as they should. Those are very important for the health, the well-being, the day-to-day lives of Wisconsinites. But the legislature also passes a lot of bills that really shape things that you don't think about. So, you know, when you go to the doctor, how is your doctor licensed? You know, things like that, and things that have a big impact when you add it all up to, you know, the type of healthcare you get or the quality of the roads you drive on. Mm-hmm. You know, it might not be the big sexy topics, but, you know, the legislature is making those big, very impactful policy decisions, but a bunch of smaller decisions that add up to a much bigger picture.
Well, let's get into the ballot then and start with the referendums because they have to do with the budget. So we're going to start at the bottom of the ticket. There are 2 proposed amendments to the state constitution on this August ballot that everyone will weigh in on. And as normal, it's legalese. It starts with the words delegation of appropriation power. So can you explain in plain English, what are these amendments that we'll see?
What? It's not immediately apparent. Everyone out there doesn't have a law degree. Yeah. So
I've been watching Suits, but I'm still.
That counts. Hey, I do too. Yes. So we're all lawyers now, right?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. So this is a great place to start because no kidding, the most phone calls and emails that I have gotten from people wondering what's on their ballot have been these 2 questions. And it is not straightforward. So bear with me a little bit because we had to go backwards, I think, a touch in order to go forwards. So the kind of how we got here is in Wisconsin, we get federal money from the federal government all the time. Things for roads or social services like Medicaid, healthcare coverage for lower income folks. It's largely paid for by the federal government. And a lot of those decisions are made in that state budget that we talked about a hot second ago. And, they figure out where they want that money to go. It's handled. But there are circumstances where we get money that we're not expecting from Washington, D.C. And that was definitely the case during the COVID-19 pandemic. People may have shoved all that out of their memory and blacked it out. I would not blame them at all. But during the pandemic and in the wake of the pandemic, because there was a lot of concern about how states were going to be able to make their budget work because COVID was so weird. We weren't getting tax money like we were used to. People were not spending money as much. And Wisconsin got a bunch of money from the federal government that did not really have a lot of restrictions on it. And that's unusual. Typically, those types of funds will say it is for X, Y, and Z, or it is, this is the Medicaid money, and you can't go spend it on conservation projects. But the money we got during COVID was a little bit different. And Governor Tony Evers, his administration really kind of decided hey, we need to get this money out quickly. So we're just going to come up with a plan and execute it. And the Republican-controlled legislature had their own ideas on how they wanted the money spent. And They weren't quite happy that the way the law is constructed in Wisconsin gives the governor a fair amount of flexibility when the money is unexpected, when it's not given out during the normal budget process. So they were...
And that's in part because I would assume disaster strikes, COVID-19, you need to act quickly. Or, it's the sort of tornadoes, we need help right now. But there's something a little bit different about what happened with COVID that...
Yeah, and I think that is kind of the thinking there. Now, that leads us to these 2 questions that people are going to see on the ballot. And the language is not straightforward, and it's somewhat confusing because when this passed the legislature, this was one proposed constitutional amendment, but it got split up into 2 questions. Folks don't necessarily need to be worried about all that, but it's helpful in kind of the way I'm going to try and break it down for folks because it is one overarching issue. And the question for folks is, do you want to give the governor more power to potentially decide where certain pots of federal money will go? Or do you want to give the legislature more power? And it's not quite that neat, but that's probably the best way for people to be thinking about it. And where concern kind of has come from people who oppose this amendment is that exactly what you just talked about. The state of Wisconsin gets federal money a lot of the times that needs to get approved quickly because there's a time clock on it and, all sorts of restrictions and regulations. And we don't want to lose the money. It's free money. It's our taxpayers' money. And then there are also times where there are things like disasters that there's an obvious need to get the money, where it needs to go quickly. we're a little bit in uncharted territory because supporters say, for instance, that things like the disaster declaration, that would not apply. Really, that what we're thinking about here is like another pandemic or another really big chunk of money coming to the state that doesn't have a clear destination. But I do think it's worth emphasizing that there is some uncertainty here. If it is passed, there might be lawsuits. There might be court battles over how certain things play out. So that was a lot of talking, but hopefully it may be, the best way to break it down is keeping the status quo gives a bit more power to the governor, and voting yes on these amendments gives the legislature more power. So a very basic kind of.
Yeah, I saw. So like the Wisconsin Democratic Party, they're not for the amendments. They're a vote for no. And the Republican-controlled legislature wants the amendments because they would like greater control over state finances. And the legislature, they do control the purse, just like Congress. So yeah. I understand the point that they're putting forward. I didn't know that the COVID-19 funds were not, that there was kind of like a carte blanche. I don't know. It's probably more complicated than that, but I feel like they're everything has a reason for it. But yeah, and there are more amendments now, and they're pretty significant. And back in April, we already saw voters approved an amendment that would ban private funding for voting and limit who can work on elections. So a lot's getting done in referendums these days. Or is that just me?
No, it's definitely not just you. And that actually is part of why people are concerned about this amendment too, is, if you put stuff in the state constitution and things go sideways, it takes a while to get it out of the state constitution. Whereas if it's a law, the legislature can repeal a law, very quickly. But, there is concern that we are deciding to do more via constitutional amendment. I think the argument has been that it is a way for the Republican-controlled legislature to get around the veto powers of Governor Tony Evers. That bothers some people, and I think also is maybe informing the decisions of some people to vote no on these.
So you're listening to CityCast Madison. You clearly care about what's happening in our city and have fantastic taste in podcasts. I've got a recommendation for another local news podcast you gotta check out. It's called 365 Amplified. Every week, the award-winning reporting team behind Madison 365 digs into their most important stories from the week. They do stories and perspectives you likely won't get from many other mainstream outlets. They invite on community leaders, lawmakers, artists, and more for candid conversations. Recent guests include State Senate candidate Samba Balde, celebrity chef Elena Terry, and Forward Madison striker Derek Gebhardt. They drop new episodes every Friday at madison365.org/amplified. You can also search 365 Amplified wherever you listen to our show. And it's something to consider, generally speaking. What about when the shoe's on the other foot? So it's possible that the Republicans will not always control the state legislature. Hey, we have new maps. We got to talk about that. Let's talk about maps and then candidates. So we talked about the referendums. 2024 is going to go down in history for many reasons. Some of them we've already touched on in Wisconsin. But also, it'll be known as the year that new electoral districts were put into place. Like, there's been so much going on, I almost forgot about our maps. They were redrawn, and that was all the war. Can you give us a refresher on what having new legislative districts means for our state and this election?
Yeah, so prevailing assumption is based off the maps. For folks who want to get up to speed a little bit, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, right before Christmas, struck down the old legislative maps, ordered new ones be redrawn. A lot of fighting over whether that was a good decision or not, but it was their decision. And earlier this year, everyone kind of settled on maps that the governor had proposed as part of that whole process. And these maps are not the most favorable to Democrats, but there is a much greater chance of Democrats taking back control of the state assembly and potentially down the road, the state Senate, than there was under the old maps. And kind of how I've been framing this for folks is there are going to be more races that people will want to be paying attention to. And also there is a much clearer pathway. It's not a guarantee. Maybe depending on who you ask, it's not even, over 50%, but there is a clear pathway for Democrats to take back control of, for 2024, the state assembly. And we could talk briefly about why that is. It gets down to Wisconsin does not do every state Senate seat. The state Senate has 33 people in it. They kind of divide it up and do some in presidential election years, some in the midterms. And, time will need to kind of play out for how that will all shake out. But all 99 seats are up for election in the state assembly. So lots of races to talk about.
It's a lot of races. And, many of us out here in Wisconsin we look to the Marquette University Law School, their polling and information. And according to John Johnson of Marquette, the assembly districts, there'll be a good number more where folks will be able to choose between a Democrat and a Republican. Districts that they just wouldn't have had that option before. And apparently it's the highest number of seats like that since 2010. So it's used to be, even just back in 2022, so 2 years ago, just 73 districts featured a candidate from both major parties. And this time up, voters in 80 assembly districts out of 99 will be able to choose between a Democrat and a Republican. So, yeah, democracy.
Democracy, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. And let's talk about our Dane County local races and contested seats. Are you seeing any trends in terms of these state legislature races? I noticed at least it seems like some folks are vacating their seat to try and go for one up, try and get the higher seat. That's one thing I saw.
Yeah, so it is going to be a busy August 13th primary in Dane County. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is the new maps. I think just people are excited. Both parties have talked about, well, particularly the Democrats have talked about, they have had a lot of success in recruiting candidates across the state in ways they haven't before, because there's an excitement about, hey, maybe we could have power again and, maybe start to pursue changes that we have wanted to for some time. I think even in Dane County, where Democrats are holding basically all of the seats representing folks in Dane County currently, there's still a lot of excitement. And with the changes in how the districts are drawn, people saying, hey, this is my chance to step up and serve and step up and run. Mm-hmm. And then there's another development, which is there is an open state Senate seat that covers parts of East Madison, like Sun Prairie, Cottage Grove. 3 state representatives, Representative Jimmy Anderson, Representative Samba Balda, and Representative Melissa Ratcliffe, are all running for that, which then means that they are all given up their seats. They're done. So that means there are a lot of empty seats to fill in the state assembly.
Yes.
Plus
musical chairs, 2024.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of how all this works. And there's also a new district that was created that does not have any incumbent lawmaker, that covers the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, like Shorewood Hills, Monroe Street area. So
is that Assembly District 77?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Cool,
That's a really interesting one.
I got that from your reporting. So.
Hey, we're glad someone's reading. That's
yeah. Well, this is close to get to talk it out. Well, so, you highlighted one. I wanted to ask you, what races you're keeping an eye on. Let's start with that Senate District 16, the one in Cottage Grove. And it's got these 3 representatives, and it's kind of a crowded field there, and some names that we know. Can you tell us about the candidates there and, what's distinguishing them between each other?
Yeah, well, the thing that I'm watching, and I think is maybe important for folks to think about as they're thinking through which candidate they want to vote for, I would encourage people, if they definitely should check out, we've been doing forums with all the candidates, and we did question and answer stories with all the candidates too on important issues. And like comparing their policy positions is very important. Don't get me wrong. But in somewhere like Dane County and Madison, you see a lot of overlap because these are all Democratic primaries. And you see very similar policy positions. So I think the thing people should be looking for is which person, is experience, what has this person done in the past? Is that something that resonates with me? And also just their personal story. All these candidates have very different stories, different issues that they really gravitate towards. And I think that's something, I think we traditionally think of people like sit down, they look at how people stand on the issues and they cast a vote that way. Whereas in some of these races, it might require a little more thought. So that's a long way of saying.
Well, this is a good race to talk about that, right? Because their personal stories are really a huge differentiator for Representatives Samba Balde and Melissa Ratliff and Jimmy Anderson.
Exactly. Each of these have each very, I think, compelling personal stories. Representative Anderson was in a car crash when he was younger with his family caused by a drunk driver, and is a person with disabilities. That has informed, I think, a lot of his policy work. He talked with me a bit about, that informed his passion for working on healthcare because he knows the healthcare system. And he's also an attorney, so he brings that perspective as well. You have Representative Balde. He was an immigrant from the Gambia and has that background as well, which is very unique in the state assembly. Also, he's been in business, in entrepreneurship. He co-owns a grocery store in East Madison.
We actually had him on the show, Grocery, when that opened up. It was just kind of like an approach to addressing a food desert in Madison. And it's like African and different foods that you might not get at other grocery stores. Yeah.
Well, folks should go back and listen to that episode
hey,
before
thanks,
they go
Andrew.
vote. We're all about the cross-promotion here. And then Representative Ratcliffe, has really focused a lot of her advocacy on LGBT issues. She has a child who is trans, among other issues. I know has been a paralegal and has a bunch of professional experience as well. So, 3 different stories, but those stories would definitely shape kind of their priorities and, what it might look like for them to serve in the state Senate.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like this Senate district, Senator Melissa Agard is the one who's leaving that seat to go be a part of the Dane County executive race, which is a big race, which we will not be getting into in this conversation because it deserves its own conversation. But I feel like one possible transition to a district that we were paying attention to is Representative Balde, Samba Balde that we're just talking about. He is vacating his assembly district, which covers much of Madison's far east side, stretching into Sun Prairie. And that one's has like 5 people running for it.
Yeah, that is the biggest primary in the state by some margin of any of the assembly seats. And I can kind of quickly go through these candidates because, again, they all have different kind of priorities.
Sure.
You have William Connors, who I believe used to serve as an alder in Sun Prairie, but also has worked a lot on housing issues. Andrew Heisel, who is an attorney who has represented a lot of like labor unions and done, I believe, some civil rights work as well. Goodwill Obieze, who has done some education and leadership work, and I believe has run in for other local offices as well. So you may have recognized his name from that. Avery Rank, who is a recent graduate of UW-Madison Law School and is an attorney as well. And Rick Rose, who serves on the Dane County Board of Supervisors. So different levels of government experience, different levels of experience and perspectives for the work that they've done outside of government. So, I don't envy the folks in Assembly District 48 and having to make a decision between 5 candidates, but it is a sign of democracy in action and these new maps in action.
Health is wealth. It is a healthy field out there, man. And there's so many other races, like you said, we just cannot cover them all. But are there any other races that you're like specifically watching closely? Any other nail biters?
Yeah, so one I do want to highlight is Assembly District 77, because I imagine a lot of folks listening to this live in District 77. That is that seat that does not have any incumbent. It was drawn, and what's really interesting is it's the first time in a decade and a half that all of the UW-Madison campus area is in one district.
How did that happen? Someone went in and said, hey, let's make this contiguous?
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting because I'm a Badger. Go Badgers on Wisconsin. When I was there, and possibly when you were there, depending on the timing, like depending on where I moved each year, I was in a different district.
Yeah.
And it will provide, in kind of the term of art is a community of interest is what in redistricting people think about trying to keep together. And that's like a community that has something that binds them. That UW-Madison community will now all be in one district. Students will not be necessarily back yet when the primary happens, unfortunately. But each of those candidates, again, kind of a different perspective. I think probably a different perspective even on the UW. You have Chuck Erickson, who's a member of the Dane County Board, who has been in his seat for a while in kind of like the Vilas neighborhood. You have Thad Schumacher, who's a pharmacist, and Renuka Mayadev, who works in a program at the UW and is kind of an expert on maternal and child health. So again, three different voices, and it will be certainly interesting to see how kind of one voice for that campus area community will impact discussions about the UW and higher ed and students in the Capitol.
Yeah, truly. Man, you're so great to talk to and so helpful, and you've given us so many things to think about. I feel like noting we also have several incumbents in Madison who have no one opposing them. The Senate incumbent, Kelda Roys, I noticed she doesn't have anyone going up against her. Neither does Representative Francesca Hong. Also west of Madison, Representative Lisa Subeck. So there are some races that, don't have anyone challenging them. No challengers. But yeah, it's a great scene. Is there anything else we should hit on?
I mean, I think the big thing is go vote, folks. I mean, primaries are really important, particularly in Dane County, where a lot of these races do not have a Republican on the general election ballot. So this is the choice. If you want a voice in who's going to represent you in the state assembly and the state senate, the time is now to get registered to vote, request your absentee ballot if you so choose, and also to, figure out who you want to be your voice in kind of a new look state legislature starting in 2025.
Yeah. And you can get your absentee ballot already this week, July 30th. It'll be awesome. Go vote. I love that. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to link to all of your reporting so people can check it out too.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love nerding out about elections, and hopefully it helps folks out there.
That's Andrew Ball, Captime State Government reporter. If you want to check out Andrew's great reporting on the candidates, head to our show notes for a link. We also just recently spoke with Jim Verbick, Deputy Clerk for the City of Madison, on what you need to know about how to vote. We also tossed that episode link on our show notes. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin. If you enjoyed this show, why don't you share this episode with someone you want to vote? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take very good care and be kind to your neighbor.